The remains of slain Egyptian Christians are returned home. The head of the World Bank calls for a business-like focus on health and education. And can a new app transform the farming industry in Kenya? Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening, I'm Esther Gidhui. You are in for Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. Families of slain Egyptian Christians mourned their relatives in church on Tuesday, but expressed happiness to have their remains returned to them. The father of one victim said, quote, "We're happy they have been returned to the village, and it is a blessing for Egyptians and Coptic Christians everywhere in the world." The 20 Egyptian Christians killed in 2015 by Islamic State militants in its former Libyan stronghold of Sirte. A Libyan official also added that there was an additional victim from Ghana. The bodies were recovered last October after the area where they were buried was recaptured from the terrorist group. The Coptic Christians were violently killed on a beach in February 2015 wearing orange jumpsuits, according to a video posted by Islamic State. A doctor detailed the horrible deaths the victims endured.
The cause of death was the slitting of the throats and the removal of their heads from their bodies, leading to the laceration of the main arteries and air passages, causing an air embolism. It was an instant and gruesome death.
The Islamic State took control of Sirte in 2015 and lost the city last year to local forces backed by U.S. airstrikes. Rangers at the Virunga National Park in the Democratic Republic of Congo say they have stopped tourists from entering the park as investigations into the kidnapping of 2 Britons there last week continue. Gunmen ambushed Robert Jeste, Bethan Davis, and their driver in Congo's volatile eastern borderlands on Friday and released them 3 days later. Park Ranger Rachel Makisa Baraka, 25, was killed trying to defend them. The rangers say the suspension of tourism is being taken as an additional precautionary measure and will remain in place until June 4th. Eastern Congo has seen successive waves of violence over the past 25 years and was at the epicenter of 2 wars between 1996 and 2003 that killed millions, mainly through hunger and disease. Protests are continuing Tuesday along the Gaza border following a day of clashes in which Israeli forces killed at least 58 Palestinians and wounded more than 2,700. Monday was the deadliest day of cross-border violence in Gaza since a 2014 war with Israel. Authorities in Gaza called for civilians to disperse as bomb blasts hit military targets in the territory. The Tel Aviv-based news outlet Haaretz says Israeli authorities ordered the strikes in response to recent militant attacks.
The actions of the army are brutal towards the Palestinians, towards the women and men. As you know, young protesters came here unprotected, and these protesters wanted to deliver a message to the outside world. They want to come back to our land, the land of 1948. We are still here, and we are going to keep our hard work here as a medical unit and the Palestinian people.
More than 130 Palestinians wounded Monday are considered in critical or serious condition. A key sticking point in peace talks between Arabs and Israelis has been what the Palestinians say is their right to return to land they were expelled from during the 1948 war. Hamas, the main governing body in Gaza, is designated as a terrorist organization by several countries, including the United States and Israel. The delegation of dignitaries attending Monday's relocation ceremony in Israel of the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem included representatives from the African nations of Rwanda, Tanzania, Kenya, Angola, Ethiopia, and South Sudan. The inauguration sparked protests in the region and elsewhere around the world. Human rights groups are now calling for an investigation of the deaths in Gaza. VOA's Latza Hoke has more.
Palestinians in Gaza have been protesting for more than a month to demand the right for refugees to return to the land they were forced to leave during the creation of Israel. The inauguration of the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem comes as Israelis mark the 70th anniversary of their nation's statehood, and Palestinians mourn the loss of their land, fueling the protesters' anger. Israel says attempts to breach the security fence between Gaza and Israel had to be stopped. The White House blamed the deaths on Gaza's Hamas leaders.
Hamas is intentionally and cynically provoking this response. And as the Secretary of State said, Israel has the right to defend itself.
But some Americans question the need to move the embassy to a fiercely contested city. A group of young Jews marched outside Trump's hotel in central Washington, demanding an end to the occupation and equal rights for Palestinians.
Jerusalem is a deeply divided city. It's a city that's been scarred by the occupation and where 370,000 Palestinians live without the same basic legal rights as their Israeli neighbors.
Britain and France were among many critics who said the United States has violated international law and UN Security Council resolutions.
As you know, the Secretary General believes that Jerusalem is a final status issue that is to be negotiated by the parties.
The United Nations Human Rights Agency in Geneva condemned firing at protesters in Gaza.
The High Commissioner for Human Rights is calling on the international community to ensure that the victims of these human rights violations receive justice.
U.S. NATO ally Turkey blamed the United States for contributing to the regional unrest.
The fact that the United States, that claimed to be a mediator to preserve the peace in the region and in the world, has a share in this massacre is definitely unacceptable.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov called for a dialogue between Israel and the Palestinians.
As you know, Russia has repeatedly proposed to serve as a platform for such a dialogue. We propose again our mediation.
Palestinian leaders said the U.S. embassy move has killed the Mideast peace process. Zlarica Hoke, VOA News, Washington.
Now, Ethiopian journalist and blogger Eskinder Nega has been jailed 8 times by the Ethiopian government on convictions of treason and terrorism. In 2012, Eskinder was sentenced to 18 years in prison after being charged with inciting the public during speeches he made calling on Ethiopians to continue with their peaceful struggle for freedom. On February 14th, he was unconditionally released as part of a presidential pardon after serving 6 years in prison. Eskinder joins me in the studio to discuss his prison ordeal as well as press freedom in Ethiopia. Eskinder, a very warm welcome to you to Africa 54.
All right, thank you for having me.
Now, let's start with your experience in jail. How were you handled?
Well, this is an African prison, so you could guess how it would be. But overall, I think the objective of the imprisonment was more than physical imprisonment. The object is to break the spirit, and that was not specifically against me, but against all prisoners, particularly political prisoners. And in the final analysis, it did not happen. That's why I'm sitting here. My spirit is still there.
But we hear of people in jail being physically tortured. Did you experience any of that?
Not this time.
Were you isolated? Were you?
I was in isolation cell, but this time no torture specifically against me, but against my friends. Like you said, I was in prison 8 times, and during those times, there were times when I was tortured. So there is torture in Ethiopia's prisons.
How has that changed you psychologically?
All right, let me start from where I am now at the present moment. I'm completely and 100% committed to forgiveness. I don't want to look, towards our past. I think we should be geared to, we should be fixated and be looking towards the future. And it hasn't. There hasn't been a negative impact against me specifically, and I think against even against most other prisoners. I think most of us are fixated on the future, not the past.
So, since your release, how has your life been? Have you been able to continue with calling for freedom and reforms in Ethiopia?
Yes, I have. Not because the government wants me to speak, but whether the government wants me to speak or not, I will continue to speak on behalf of democracy, on behalf of nonviolence, on behalf of reconciliation, because I think this is what we need in Ethiopia. In particular, I think we need to bring the South African model to Ethiopia. This is, like I said, we don't need to look back towards the past. We need to be fixated on the future, and the way forward is the South African method.
Do you have any fears at all of being rearrested?
That possibility exists. That possibility exists, but whether that possibility exists or not, there's still the mission that has to be completed. This mission is to bring democracy to Ethiopia, the kind of democracy that we have in South Africa, the kind of democracy that we have in Botswana and in Ghana and in many African countries. We need to bring that kind of democracy to Ethiopia. So until that's completed, until that we're able to do that, I'll be there speaking through nonviolent means, pressing for democracy.
Now, there's a new government in place in Ethiopia. What have you seen? Have there been any reforms, or what do you expect should be the #1 reform?
Well, we're cautiously optimistic about the change. We're cautiously optimistic about the new prime minister. This is the catchphrase. This is the most popular way to describe the present situation in the country. Now, what do we mean by cautiously optimistic? The prime minister is saying the right things. Now, this is very different than the time we had during Mellis's time. Mellis enjoyed annoying the public, going against the public opinion. But now we have a prime minister who looks as if though he cares what the public thinks, who cares about public opinion. And that's a change, that's a welcome change. But that's not enough, because people have demanded change. They want to see real change on the ground. Now, what needs to be done to this end? What must he do to bring real change on the ground? He needs to do two things. First, he needs to lift the state of emergency. And then he needs to call for an all-inclusive dialogue. What do we mean by an all-inclusive dialogue? An all-inclusive dialogue between a dialogue between the APRDF and all political parties, including those who have been branded as terrorist organizations.
I gotta ask a question, because critics have said that journalists in Ethiopia are all divided into two. They're either with the government or the opposition, that there is no objectivity. Is this a fair criticism?
I think we're all in the same boat, because unless there's democracy, it's not possible to practice journalism. We don't have choice. We have been forced to engage in activism for human rights and democracy because we have been entangled in the events. We have been victims of oppression. I spent 6.5 years in prison. So this, the question of democracy is not an abstract thing for me. It's something concrete. So, I think all journalists are in the same boat. We all have to, call for democracy, and we have to be activists for democracy until we have democracy, the enabling environment that would allow us to practice journalism.
Eskinder, thank you so much. You are a story of courage for press freedom and for political freedom and humanity in Ethiopia and the whole of Africa. Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.
Eskinder Nega is an Ethiopian journalist and a blogger. Now, a Kenyan court has rejected a plea for a change to the laws on how property should be split in divorce cases. A ruling activists say dealt a blow to women's rights in the country. Kenya's High Court on Monday dismissed a 2016 petition from the Federation of Women Lawyers in Kenya, an advocacy group that had argued the Marriage Properties Act was unconstitutional because it entitled each partner only to what they contributed. The Constitution states that married couples are entitled to equal rights, but the group argued that the law unfairly impacted women who were more likely to suffer financially from a divorce. We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Coming up, how the fight against poverty needs a more aggressive focus on the young. Stay with us.
This is a country that I chose to become a citizen. I didn't have to become a citizen. I chose to become a citizen.
I feel like America gave me an opportunity to pursue my passion as an artist.
I really believe that clean eating is a way to a more successful life, or a happier life, if you want to put it that way.
One of the things that helps me wake up every morning is doing better, being better.
We grew up poor, and so I'm always focused on helping the working class be able to have a more comfortable lifestyle.
I'm passionate about doing justice every day. I oftentimes say that justice is a verb, not a noun. I believe in action and moving the ball forward.
How do you see the world? I see countries in turmoil.
I see our planet changing.
I see people at peace.
No matter how you see the world, you'll get an unbiased and uncensored view of it on Voice of America. On television, radio, online, and mobile. In more than 40 languages all day, every day. Millions of people tune us in.
How do I see the world? On Voice of America.
It's time now for our health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lenore Mudu with a look at child health education. Lenore.
Hello, Esther. Well, leaders of development agencies say the fight against poverty needs a more aggressive focus on the health and education of the young and vulnerable. World Bank President Jim Yong Kim recently warned that social unrest spread without a business-like approach to philanthropy. VOA's Mike O'Sullivan reports from Los Angeles.
1 in 10 people around the world lives in extreme poverty, which the World Bank defines as earning less than $1.90 a day. Malnutrition, stunted growth, and cognitive impairment affect over 30% of children in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, leaving them unprepared for the automated economy of the future. So warns World Bank President Jim Yong Kim, who says the numbers are improving, but not fast enough.
Many people will find themselves undereducated and without the skills to be able to compete in the economy of the future. And so many countries are going to go down the path of fragility, conflict, violence, and then, of course, extremism and migration. That's going to happen if we don't change the mindset.
There are success stories in the battle against disease and illiteracy, says a former head of USAID who now leads the Rockefeller Foundation.
When you look at countries like Rwanda, they've achieved a 70% reduction in child mortality in just 1 decade. So we know that nations can be successful. What it takes, though, is more political will, more focus on science and technology.
China is a new player in the world of development. By one count, its loans and aid to 140 countries exceeded $350 billion over a 14-year period. China's new aid agency has fewer restrictions than Western agencies on their loans regarding corruption, governance, and human rights.
On the Chinese side, they basically claim that their form of interaction, which is basically doing business, that is preferable to the way that Western institutions have engaged in the past.
China's growing involvement in developing economies worries some, but Furchin says the jury is still out on its impact. World Bank lending totaled nearly $60 billion last year for improving infrastructure or meeting basic needs like health and education. Kim says the bank will release a ranking of nations in its first Human Capital Index to compare investments in human needs on a nation-to-nation basis. One who works in the health sector welcomes the approach.
And so if we don't think about people as being part of our asset, the biggest asset class really we have is our talents as people, then we're never going to unlock that potential for the creativity, for the next generation of innovation, for the next cure that we have in the marketplace.
These analysts say a stable and prosperous world requires a focus on human needs, and in the end, that's good business. Mike O'Sullivan, VOA News, Los Angeles.
Now, Rwanda has achieved most of its Millennium Development Targets for health, and observers say the country is making some gains toward the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. But some challenges remain, and we will look at what is being done to address them. Joining us for more on the subject is Catherine Mugeni. She's Director of Community Health at the Maternal Child and Community Health Division with Rwanda's Ministry of Health. Catherine Mugeni, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure for me.
So there have been so many good news about Rwanda and the progress made in terms of addressing maternal and child health. What have been the most successful maternal child health interventions in the country?
Yeah.
I think we achieved a lot. We achieved the MDGs, especially the delivery at health facilities. And because of the intervention the government, through the Ministry of Health, put in place, like to increase the antenatal care, to increase the postnatal care, all women come to deliver at health facility, and after that we provide them a package of service during the postnatal care. Those are the key program intervention we have put in place. Also, there is also basic emergency obstetrical care. The health provider is supposed to give during at health facilities when the women have a problem. We have also some program like facilities like the ambulance when we have some pregnant women at village level. Start the labor, the ambulance can go to pick them up to the health facilities.
That's very interesting when you talk about the ambulance picking them up, because one of the challenges that we have seen is in rural areas, for example, women do not have access to healthcare centers, or the treatment or the services cannot reach them. So tell us about how some of the ways that the Ministry of Health, your service, your department has been able to address that.
Yeah, I think for those problems, we put in place a system at community level. For example, we have the community health workers who monitor those pregnant women. They have registered, they follow them, and they encourage them to go to deliver at health facilities. We have what we call the rapid SMS system, and this system sends an alert when the pregnant women have a problem at community level. It's like a big commitment at all levels to decrease the maternal mortality, and in Rwanda, especially at community level.
So let's talk about the healthcare workers. Capacity building is so important. In some areas, you don't find the providers, you don't find the expertise. So how has the ministry been able to support that in implementing capacity building in order to decrease newborn death and also postpartum family planning?
We know that the health the human resource of health is a big pillar in our health system. And with partner, we have designed a model to emphasize the capacity building of health workers through different ways, like we produce with MCSP.
And that's the Maternal and Child Survival Program, yes.
Yeah, we produce the tools can help them to easily understand what they're supposed to do when it comes, for example, for resuscitation for the baby. And for that, we change and institutionalize those tools, mentorship tools, and we train them. And after the training, there is like a Rwanda Association per Tradition, follow them at the fields, and they come also at the district level, at the hospital, to exchange with other health workers on the challenge they're facing during the service.
And we're out of time, but I just wanted to quickly get your take on the best way to reach women with unmet need for family planning. That's one of the issues that you've been addressing very quickly.
I think we have started what we call the PPFP, the postpartum family planning, and because the rate of delivery at health center is very high in Rwanda, and what we do, it's a big opportunity. We don't miss this opportunity to start to be focused on long modern methods.
I think there are some lessons there to be learned by others. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And that was Catherine Mugeni. She's Director of Community Health at the Maternal Child and Community Health Division with Rwanda's Ministry of Health. And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter at Lenore Moudou. Esther, back to you.
Thank you, Lenore. Be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday and Thursday on Africa 54. It's time now for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. We want to update Kenyan farming techniques. There's an app for that. We'll be right back.
In Somalia, delegates meet in Mogadishu to review the country's provisional constitution, which is supposed to be approved by the end of the year. In Uganda, ADF rebel group leader Jamil Mukulu appears in court on charges of mass murder and crimes against humanity for the 2015 violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo. In Guinea, opposition protests resume over disputed local elections in February, bringing the capital Conakry to a halt. In Comoros, former President Ahmed Abdallah Sambi calls for the Constitutional Court to be reformed before the constitutional referendum announced by President Azali Assoumani. Finally, in Ethiopia, Pizza Hut opens 3 restaurants in the capital Addis Ababa, becoming the first major international restaurant franchise to open in the country.
And welcome back to Africa 54. Here's what's trending. A new phone app is helping farmers in Kenya to manage multiple farms and agricultural tasks remotely. The system uses sensors that relay the moisture, temperature, and humidity levels, as well as video and photo images to a central processing unit located in the farm. The unit then sends a message to the farmer, who can control irrigation, temperature, and humidity regulators with a smart swipe. The system has successfully been piloted and is awaiting an intellectual property certificate. Kenya's Ministry of Water and Irrigation is promising to adopt the technology in an attempt to boost food security in the country. Next up, 3 dazzling diamonds are expected to fetch over $18.5 million when they go to auction in Geneva Tuesday. Among the gems under the hammer is the Farnese Blue, a 6.16 carat blue diamond that was gifted to the Queen of Spain in 1715. It's since traveled across Europe for centuries, secretly kept in a royal jewelry case. Almost no one knew of its existence. Also on the lot is Sotheby's spring sale, 2 dazzling white diamonds, each weighing over 50 carats. The diamonds were discovered in Botswana and cut in Antwerp and are expected to bring over $15 million combined. And finally, Israel reveled in its victory at the Eurovision Song Contest on Sunday, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu briefly breaking out in a chicken dance in tribute, setting social media abuzz. Neta Barzilai beat 25 other contestants with her up-tempo song Toy, whose lyrics were inspired by the #MeToo movement. The 25-year-old accompanied her winning performance with trills, clocking sounds, and chicken-like dance moves in an eye-catching and bizarre performance. Crowds broke out into song in Tel Aviv's Rabin Square, with many jumping in the fountain there, as well as at Jerusalem's main open-air market to celebrate the victory. And that's what's trending today. And that's our show for today. Good night from Washington.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Some American English expressions sound like they could hurt.
Hit the spot.
Let's see if Anna and Jonathan can help us out.
Have you been to the new restaurant down the street?
I haven't. Is the food any good?
It's delicious. I ate lunch there yesterday, and I had a hamburger that really hit the spot.